In a universe where life does not end at death, we explore the infinite possibilities forged by our very minds. Welcome to Arthadian Anthologies. Greetings, fellow travelers and storytellers. Welcome to the Arthadian Anthologies podcast, where I, MS Arthadian, dive into the ever-expanding universe I'm developing and the deeper meaning behind it all. We return to the present in this entry, following Kaiver as he eavesdrops on the next drop of this unknown resource run by the Mythmakers. Also, if you enjoy this podcast, you can help me by rating it on your preferred podcasting app, as well as sharing it with your friends. And if you'd like to leave a tip, you can do so by clicking the link in the description. Thank you. And without further ado, let's dive in. Einzo 5th, Array 2, Cycle 137. As dusk draws near on the pillar of Acroniax, Kaiver Tremere returns to the southern post of the Scrap Towers. With the information gathered by the Overseer, an apparent meeting is to be held in the outskirts of Kaiver's current location. Keeping himself hidden, he watches for an opportune time to strike. As time passes, though, Kaiver can't help but think about Zentimora. Kaiv? I've made it to the location the Overseer shared with me. Sending scans over now for verification. The coordinates are correct, but the scans are picking up a strange frequency near you. Interesting. Can you discern the origin? Her voice cut off. Zenti? Zenti, come in. Do you read me? Struggling to regain connection with his elite knight, Kaiver began messing with the comm frequencies to connect directly with Zentimora's codex. After a minute of his struggle, he finally tapped into her codex and activated the built-in microphone. A subtle scratching sounded off, like the sound of metal dragged across paved cement. Adjusting the pickup radius on the mic, Kaiver overheard malicious laughter. Then, to think we were able to capture a Plasmatic Knight of all things. This is a great feat for sure. Kulon! An identical voice echoes across the alley, breaking Kaiver out of his thoughts. As he examines the drop point, Kaiver sees an individual prime dressed in an all-white suit with a question mark imprinted onto the back of his blazer. Then, another voice answers back from within the cargo pod near the individual. Yes, Enigma. Set up a perimeter for us. I don't want anything to sully our partnership with Thread-Eye. Upon hearing this, Kaiver watches a large figure step out of the pod. Their skin, blending in with the darkened atmosphere surrounding the Scrap Towers, makes it difficult to determine what they are. It shall be done. Kulon nods. He then pulls out a massive hilt that glistens from the faint lights shining around the drop point. As he approaches the eastern side of the point, Kaiver begins maneuvering westward, away from this Kulon figure. Just in case there are more lackeys, Kaiver seeks to know exactly what he's dealing with. Keeping a close eye on Kulon's position, Kaiver slides his finger across a setting on his right forearm, activating a stealth field. This causes light to refract off of his tech armor he wears, making it increasingly difficult for him to be seen. However, he only has 3 uses of it, and each use only lasts for a minute. As he quietly sneaks closer to the cargo pod, 2 other figures step onto the pod's lift with 2 heavily fortified crates being carried by the same haulers that the tower salvagers use for their work. Watch your frames! The resources in those crates are not kind to our technology. Enigma informs the 2 figures as Kaiver is close enough to make out 2 Sin frames. He then begins theorizing what could be in the crates. From what I've gathered on Enigma, he seeks reputable standing in the web, which means these weekly shipments must be pretty important, especially since the Senator is so interested in these shipments as well. A sudden ring alerts him to the fact that his stealth field is about to deactivate. He then activates the next one while surveying the drop point. From what he's able to see, the Kulon fellow has reached the northern perimeter, while the 2 Sins have gently laid down the crates. Enigma seems to examine the resources contained within them, when suddenly, another pod rumbles above the drop point. It has begun. Slight vibrations ripple across the metallic surface of the pretermit as the newly arrived pod opens its door to 3 more figures. Thankfully, the new arrival gave Kaiver the opportunity to sneak behind the cargo pod. Peeking around the corner, Kaiver carefully plants an explosive on the side of the cargo pod. Then, as silently as possible, he flicks a microscopic magnetic comm onto each Sin and falls back to a safe distance before activating his final stealth field. The only issue is that in order to receive the comm info, he will have to stay within 30 feet of the Sin. Once falling back and activating the last stealth field, he turns up the volume on the comms. From the Redicon Republic, setting up the secure zone around the perimeter. This time, no one will impede on our drop. Enigma's voice reassures the new arrivals. Hearing this, Kaiver assumes that he is speaking of Kulon, which reminds him to keep an eye out for him as well, since he is boxing him in. With a quick glance, Kaiver sees the darkened Redicon silhouette reach the western side of the perimeter, all while Kaiver is at the south side. Good. An unknown voice appears. Although it would be nice to capture the other knight that's been causing your mythmakers trouble. The voice chuckles under his breath as the comm audibly overhears the irritation in Enigma's voice. Nothing my effects can't handle. After all, from what I hear, the knight we captured in our last meeting is an elite. Hearing this, Kaiver knows for certain now that they still have Zentimora in their custody. Closing his eyes, he takes a deep breath and recalls his master's wisdom. Emotions are reactionary impulses that can fog our better judgment. When they occur, the impulse acts like a catalyst for our affinities. Therefore, once you are powerful, strong primal emotion can be a burden, as you can lose control. How do I control it then, Master Sor? through a technique called the energetic flow. It is used to conserve energy by releasing your own physical stamina through a series of breaths. However, at your level, doing so should help calm your impulsive emotions. Show me, please, Master. Kaiver focuses on his breath, calming his emotions as best as he can. However, he can't help but think about Zenti. Then Enigma continues. Shall we get started on the trade? Of course. How much supply has come in? The voice asks in a curious tone. To Kaiver, it sounds less like the myth makers are the suppliers of this unknown resource, but instead a separate party supplies it. Less this time around. Supposedly the damned specialists have acquired even more mercenaries to thwart our efforts in Electrum. Enigma explains, grabbing Kaiver's attention. We have 2 refined ingots. One for the supply at Admin, and the other for the Red Eye's vault. A moment of silence gives Kaiver a chance to see where Kulan is at, but his focus is broken when his stealth field times out. As his figure reappears, the unknown voice returns through the comms. Everything seems to be in order. Marvelous! Enigma exclaims. Please inform the all-seeing eye. The next myth spread will be one of, in a sudden turn of events. As Kaiver hears this exchange, a paralyzing grip clenches the back of his neck. He struggles to break free, but is lifted into the air and thrown towards the meeting. The comms pick up multiple voices. What was that? I thought you said a perimeter was formed. Kulan must have found someone. Quickly attempting to reach his feet, that same grip returns. But this time, Kaiver's cowl is torn off, causing him to pivot towards his pursuer. But he feels a massive palm grapple the back of his head and slams his face against the ground. Dozing off, Kaiver feels the blood rushing out of his nostrils, with his head aching from the pain. Then he feels his hair being pulled. Continuing to struggle, he looks up to see a towering, obsidian-skinned Redicon dragging him towards the cargo pod. Shit, I need to send the recording before anyone notices, Kaiver thinks to himself, as he reaches for his codex to send the recording back to the Rin Tower. While Kaiver sends out the recording, Kulan yells out, Enigma! You have another special guest! Right before being flung to the center of the criminal gathering, the recording is sent. With the back of his head hitting the metallic ground, Kaiver lets a soft smirk show, as standing before him is a light-skinned prime with piercing green eyes that lock onto Kaiver's. His arms are crossed with a wide grin that says, I've got you now. Well, if it isn't the Plasmatic Knight has been such a thorn in my side. Tell me. Enigma leans down to his new captive. What did I ever do to warrant a knight of the Rin Empire's attention? Kaiver hawks up a wad of blood and phlegm, causing Enigma to reel back from him. Kaiver chuckles, with his eyes closed, and spits off to the side. Come now. You should realize by now why I've targeted you, and you alone. The blood in Kaiver's eyes pierce right back up at Enigma's. Enigma stands tall, analyzing the look in his captive's expression. Then he veers back at the other 3 figures that happen to be Kron Prime. Would the admin consort like another Plasmatic Knight to add to their games? Hearing this, the one on the right side steps forward and examines Kaiver. A malicious grin befalls his face as he says to Enigma, Indeed. Perhaps this night will last longer than the other did. Kaiver's thoughts begin roaming as he tries to make sense of what this Kron just said. The grin becomes contagious as Enigma begins laughing maniacally. In this very moment, the emotions began flooding Kaiver's thoughts, with his crimson sight fogging up his perception. His own blood being the only thing he could focus on. That, and the thought of them killing Zenti for sport. Kaiver takes in one single breath, then releases. An orb of violet plasma erupts from a central point of Kaiver's hands. In that very instant, all 7 of Kaiver's foes are engulfed by an ionic pulse that blasts them all away. Standing up, the orb coalesces back to Kaiver's hands as he twists them in such a way that he forges a spark rune. "Now you've done it," he shouts in rage. "You've awakened the storm in me!" Unleashing the full scope of his power, Kaiver ignites the rune he just forged into a spear of lightning. Then, with his cloak, he activates its vortex and ascends 20 feet into the air. With his new vantage point, he sees the Redicon and Enigma stand to their feet, while the others are all still paralyzed from his last blast. In his bloodlust eyes, all Kaiver could think about is avenging Zentimora. Charging his spear with all his energy, he aims directly at Enigma's heart. With a final thrust, he explodes in raw, primal rage. The spark of Kaiver's vengeance arcs straight through Enigma's torso, vaporizing his chest as he collapses to the ground and convulses. Watching this happen before his eyes, Kaiver feels complete when he feels his energy is completely depleted. He can no longer hold his balance over the vortex, making him plummet to the ground. He begins to laugh, hearing the heavy steps of Kulon approaching him. Seeing the Redicon veering down at him, Kaiver breathes heavily. "Looks like you're out of a job. Unfortunate, huh?" Kulon just glares at him with hatred in his dark purple eyes. "You are a rune forger," he snarls, leveling his tech saber to Kaiver's throat. "I, Kulon of Evemore's will now send you to the Archon's Void, where all you forgers belong!" Kulon prepares a fatal strike at his target's heart as Kaiver closes his eyes, accepting his death. However, he has one last move to play. Tapping the side of his forearm, he activates the explosive he planted on the cargo pod. In a blinding flash, Kaiver, Kulon, and the rest of the bodies surrounding the blast are baked by the thermal radiation. Kaiver's final thought is, "I'm sorry, brother." I thank you for listening to this entry. Kaiver's storyline will continue further in the background. As you know, life does not end at death. On the other hand, Next week is our final Reborn in Power trilogy, which will actually feature Kaiver's brother. So tune in next week for that, as well as an archival announcement. If you are just now joining the anthology, check out arthadiananthologies.com for more content that expands this new expanding universe. You can also support the creation of this podcast by donating through the link found in the description of this episode. Until next time, travelers, be safe, stay safe, and if death comes to you, may you be reborn in power.